The flames licked at the evening sky, turning it from blue to orange as Cassidy Greene watched her childhood home burn before her eyes. She had barely escaped with her life, the hem of her dress already singed, and her lungs filled with smoke that made each breath a struggle. The sound of crackling timber and shattering glass drowned out her weak cries for help as she crawled away from the inferno, her body too weak to stand. Isaac Ingram had been riding back to his ranch after a long day of cattle driving when he saw the plume of smoke rising in the distance. Without hesitation, he dug his heels into his horse's sides and galloped toward the blaze. As he approached the burning homestead, he spotted a figure on the ground, desperately trying to crawl away from the danger. "Hold on," he shouted, leaping from his horse and running toward her. The heat from the fire was unbearable, but he pushed forward, driven by something beyond rational thought. He found her collapsed, her face streaked with soot and tears, struggling for each breath. "I've got you, miss," Isaac said, scooping her into his arms. She felt so light, so fragile against his chest, and a fierce protectiveness surged through him. "I've got you now." Cassidy's eyes fluttered open to meet the determined gaze of a stranger. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes that reflected the orange glow of the fire. "My home," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Nothing we can do for it now," Isaac replied, holding her tighter as he carried her away from the flames. With each step, he made a silent vow. "I swear I won't let go. You're safe with me." The year was 1873, and the Montana Territory was as beautiful as it was dangerous. Isaac's ranch lay 5 miles to the west, and as he settled Cassidy onto his horse, climbing up behind her to keep her steady, he knew that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. Cassidy slipped in and out of consciousness as they rode, her body occasionally racked with coughing fits. Isaac kept one arm firmly around her waist, her back pressed against his chest as he guided his horse through the growing darkness. "Stay with me," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. "We're almost there." By the time they reached his modest ranch house, the stars were scattered across the night sky like silver dust. His foreman, an older man named Frank, rushed out at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. "Isaac, what in tarnation, Frank, get some water boiling and find those medicinal herbs, Mrs. Wilson gave us last winter," Isaac instructed as he dismounted, carefully bringing Cassidy down with him. "There's been a fire at the old Greene place. She's all that made it out from what I could tell." Frank's weathered face paled in the moonlight. "The Greene place, but that's, I know." "Now hurry." Inside, Isaac laid Cassidy gently on his own bed. In the lamplight, he could see her properly for the first time. Despite the soot and ash, he could tell she was beautiful. Her chestnut hair was singed at the ends, and her simple dress was torn and blackened, but her face had a delicate strength to it that caught him off guard. As he dampened a cloth and began to clean the grime from her face, her eyes opened again. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "My ranch, name's Isaac Ingram. You're safe here." Cassidy tried to sit up, only to be overcome by dizziness. "My father," Isaac placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy now, was there anyone else in the house?" Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "No, Pa's been gone 3 years now, it was just me." Her body shook with a sob. "Everything I had was in that house." Something tightened in Isaac's chest. "You've got more than you think, Miss Greene. You've got your life, and that's no small thing." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the kind eyes set in a face tanned by long days under the sun. "How do you know my name?" "Everyone knows the Greene place," Isaac said simply. "Your father was a good man. Helped me set up my ranch when I first came to these parts." Frank arrived with the hot water and herbs, and Isaac stepped back to let the older man tend to Cassidy's minor burns and prepare a tea to soothe her throat. As he watched, he found himself unable to look away from her face, from the quiet dignity she maintained despite everything she'd just lost. "I'll leave you to rest," Isaac said when Frank had finished. "We can talk more in the morning." Cassidy reached out suddenly, catching his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for carrying me away from there." "I promised I wouldn't let go," he replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze, "and I meant it." That night, as Isaac bedded down on a makeshift pallet in the main room, listening to the occasional cough from his bedroom, he found himself wondering what would happen next. He had saved her life, but what now? He hadn't expected the fierce protectiveness he felt toward this woman he barely knew. All he knew was that when he had seen her trying to escape the flames, something had changed inside him. Like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed, morning brought clarity and pain for Cassidy. Her body ached, her lungs still burned with each breath, but she was alive. The events of the previous night came back to her in disjointed fragments, the smell of smoke that had woken her, the desperate scramble to escape as flames engulfed the kitchen, the collapse onto the hard ground outside, and then him. The cowboy with the gentle hands and determined eyes who had carried her to safety. She found her dress, somewhat cleaned but still bearing the marks of the fire, folded at the foot of the bed. Next to it lay a simple shirt and pair of trousers that would be too large for her, but would serve until something better could be arranged. After dressing in the borrowed clothes, secured with a belt cinched tight around her waist, Cassidy made her way out of the bedroom. The main room of the ranch house was modest but tidy, with a wooden table, a few chairs, and a small cooking area. Through the window, she could see a barn, a corral with several horses, and beyond that, rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever. Isaac was at the stove, his back to her as he stirred something in a pot. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and a smile spread across his face. "You're up," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," Cassidy admitted, her voice still rough. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." Isaac gestured to a chair. "Sit, you need to eat something." As she settled at the table, Cassidy took the opportunity to study her rescuer. In the daylight, she could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps only a few years older than her 22 years. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck, and his face, though weathered by the elements, had a kindness to it that put her at ease. "I need to go back," she said after he'd placed a bowl of porridge in front of her, "to see what's left." Isaac's expression grew serious. "I rode out at first light. There's not much standing, Miss Greene. The fire took it all." Cassidy closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "Still," she insisted, "I need to see it. There might be something." "Of course," Isaac agreed. "When you're stronger, maybe tomorrow." "I'm stronger than I look," she countered, meeting his gaze steadily. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I don't doubt it for a second, Miss Greene, but even the strongest need time to recover." Their conversation was interrupted by Frank's arrival. The older man nodded respectfully to Cassidy. "Miss Greene, good to see you on your feet. Might not remember me, but I used to help your pa with the spring roundup." "Mr. Peters," Cassidy said, recognition dawning. "Pa always said you were the best with the troublesome calves." Frank's weathered face creased in a smile. "Your pa had a way with words." He turned to Isaac. "Sheriff's riding in, probably heard about the fire." Isaac nodded. "I'll speak with him." To Cassidy, he added, "Finish your breakfast, you need your strength." Sheriff Tom Williams was a broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense demeanor that had served him well in maintaining order in the growing town of Riverspend. He dismounted with a grunt, eyeing Isaac as he approached. "Heard there was trouble at the Greene place last night," he said without preamble. Isaac nodded. "Fire started in the kitchen from what Miss Greene told me. I was riding back when I saw the smoke." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "And where is Miss Greene now, inside?" "She's shaken up but not badly hurt." Sheriff Williams studied Isaac's face for a long moment. "Convenient that you happened to be riding by." Isaac felt a flare of anger. "What exactly are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "Not suggesting anything, just gathering facts. The Greene place is sitting on prime grazing land. Plenty of ranchers been eyeing it since old James passed." "And you think I'd burn a woman out of her home for land?" Isaac's voice was low, dangerous. The sheriff held up a placating hand. "Didn't say that, but you've been expanding your herd, might need more land soon." "I'd buy it fair and square if that were the case," Isaac retorted. "Now, if you want to talk to Miss Greene, she's inside, but go easy, she lost everything last night." Sheriff Williams adjusted his hat. "I'll keep that in mind." Inside, Cassidy answered the sheriff's questions calmly, though Isaac could see the strain it put on her. Yes, she had been alone. No, she had no enemies she knew of. Yes, the stove had been lit for her evening meal. No, she hadn't noticed anything unusual before the fire started. "Where will you go now, Miss Greene?" the sheriff asked finally. Cassidy hesitated. "I haven't had time to think about it." "She'll stay here," Isaac said, surprising even himself. "Until she decides what she wants to do next." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? And what would the good people of Riversbend think about an unmarried woman staying at a bachelor's ranch?" "I don't much care what they think," Isaac replied evenly. "Miss Greene needs a safe place and I have room. Frank's here as chaperone if propriety is your concern." After the sheriff had left, promising to investigate the fire further, Cassidy turned to Isaac. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Offer to let me stay." "Where else would you go? I could find work in town, maybe at the hotel or and face the gossip and pitying looks." Isaac shook his head. "You've been through enough. Stay here at least until you're back on your feet." Cassidy studied him, trying to understand his motives. "Why are you helping me?" Isaac looked away out the window toward the distant horizon. "Your father helped me when no one else would. I was just a kid with big dreams and no idea what I was doing. He showed me how to survive out here." He turned back to her. "Besides, when I saw you there trying to get away from those flames, I made a promise. That you wouldn't let go," Cassidy remembered. "That's right, and I aim to keep it." The next day, against Isaac's protests, Cassidy insisted on visiting what remained of her home. The ride was silent, each lost in their own thoughts as they approached the blackened ruins. Where a modest two-story farmhouse had once stood, only a charred skeleton remained, the stone chimney the only structure still fully intact. Cassidy dismounted slowly, her eyes taking in the devastation. Isaac stayed close, ready to support her if needed, but giving her space to process her loss. "My whole life was here," she said, her voice barely audible. "Every memory of my parents." She moved carefully through the ruins, occasionally stopping to touch a scorched piece of furniture or pick up a blackened object. In what had been the main room, she knelt and brushed aside ash to reveal a metal box, its surface discolored by heat but still intact. "Pa's strongbox," she breathed, trying to lift it but finding it too heavy in her weakened state. Isaac stepped forward, gently taking it from her. "I've got it." They continued through the ruins, salvaging what little remained, a few cooking pots, a miraculously unburned quilt that had been stored in a cedar chest, a family Bible with singed edges but mostly intact. As they prepared to leave, Cassidy turned to look once more at the place that had been her home. "I was born in that house," she said softly. "Learned to walk and talk there, nursed my mother through her final illness and buried her under the oak tree out back." Her voice caught. "Said goodbye to Pa there too after the fever took him." Isaac stood beside her, silent but present, his solid presence a comfort she hadn't expected. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted. "I've never been anywhere else." Isaac looked down at her, taking in the profile of her face against the blue sky. "You don't have to decide right away," he said. "For now, you've got a place to stay and time to figure things out." On the ride back, Cassidy asked about Isaac's ranch. "It's not much compared to some," he told her. "Started with just 10 head of cattle and a run-down cabin. Your father taught me which grasses were best, where to find water that wouldn't dry up in summer. Now I've got 100 head and 3 good hands besides Frank." "Pa always said you were a quick learner," Cassidy remarked. "Said you had good instincts." Isaac looked at her in surprise. "He talked about me, sometimes. He liked to keep track of the people he helped, took pride in watching them succeed." Something warm spread through Isaac's chest at the thought of James Greene speaking well of him. "He was a good man. I wish I'd told him what his help meant to me." He knew, Cassidy assured him. Pa could read people better than most could read books. Back at the ranch, Frank had prepared a simple stew for dinner. The three of them sat at the table, and for the first time since the fire, Cassidy found herself thinking of something other than what she had lost. She listened as the men discussed the upcoming cattle drive, the new foal born in the spring, the price of beef in the eastern markets. After dinner, Isaac opened the strongbox they had recovered. Inside were land deeds, including one for the Greene property, a small bag of gold coins, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "Your father was prudent," Isaac remarked, handing her the documents. "These deeds are still valid. The land is yours to sell or keep." Cassidy ran her fingers over the papers. "Selling would give me enough to start somewhere else," she mused, "but I don't know where I'd go." "No need to decide tonight," Isaac said gently, "or tomorrow for that matter." That night, lying in Isaac's bed while he once again slept on a pallet in the main room, Cassidy found her thoughts drifting to her rescuer. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an integrity that reminded her of her father. And when he looked at her with those intense eyes, she felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. The days began to develop a rhythm. In the mornings, Cassidy would help prepare breakfast, insisting on contributing to the household in some way. She learned the routine of the ranch, watching as Isaac and his men moved cattle between pastures, mended fences, and trained horses. A week after the fire, a wagon arrived from town carrying Mrs. Wilson, the wife of the general store owner, and several parcels. "Couldn't have you wearing men's clothes indefinitely," the older woman explained, presenting Cassidy with dresses, undergarments, and personal items. The ladies of the church took up a collection. Cassidy was overwhelmed by the generosity. "Please thank everyone for me," she said, holding a simple blue dress against herself. "This is more than I could have hoped for." Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. "That's what neighbors do." She lowered her voice. "Now, about your situation here, people are talking." "People always talk," Cassidy replied, a hint of her father's stubbornness showing through. "Indeed they do. And they're saying it's not proper for a young woman to stay at a bachelor's ranch, even with old Frank as chaperone." Cassidy lifted her chin. "Mr. Ingram saved my life, Mrs. Wilson. He's been nothing but respectful and kind." "Oh, I don't doubt it. Isaac Ingram is one of the good ones, but reputations are fragile things, my dear." After Mrs. Wilson left, Cassidy found Isaac by the corral, watching as one of his men worked with a spirited young horse. "Mrs. Wilson brought clothes," she said, coming to stand beside him. "And gossip." Isaac glanced at her. "Let me guess. The good people of Riverspend are concerned about your virtue." Despite herself, Cassidy smiled. "Something like that. Does it bother you, what they're saying?" She considered the question. "It should, I suppose. A proper lady would be scandalized." She looked up at him. "But I've never been particularly concerned with what others think. Pa used to say that was both my greatest strength and my most troublesome quality." Isaac laughed, a rich sound that made something flutter in Cassidy's chest. "Your pa was right about that. Still," she continued, "I can't impose on you indefinitely. I need to make plans." "You're not imposing," Isaac said, suddenly serious. "Having you here, it's nice. The place feels more like a home with you in it." Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Cassidy felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "I should help Frank with dinner," she said finally, breaking the moment. As spring turned to summer, Cassidy found herself becoming more integrated into life at the ranch. She took over much of the cooking and household management, freeing Frank to spend more time with the cattle. She planted a vegetable garden near the house, using seeds Mrs. Wilson had provided, and spent hours nurturing the tender plants. Isaac found himself looking forward to coming back to the house each day, to seeing Cassidy's smile and hearing about her small triumphs and challenges. They developed a habit of sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset and talking. He told her about growing up in St. Louis, about his dream of having his own land, about the long journey west that had nearly killed him before he stumbled onto her father's property. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood, of learning to ride and shoot alongside her father, of her mother's gentle guidance in more domestic arts, of the loneliness after they were both gone. "Weren't there any young men who caught your eye in Riverspend?" Isaac asked one evening. Cassidy smiled wryly. "A few tried, but most were looking for someone more conventional, a woman who'd be content to stay in town, have babies, and gossip with the other wives. And that's not you. I want children someday," she admitted, "but I need more than just that. I need open skies and room to breathe." She looked out across the grassland, painted gold by the setting sun. "I need this." Isaac studied her profile, struck by how perfectly she fit into this landscape, how natural she looked with the wind playing with her hair and the vast Montana sky behind her. "It suits you," he said softly. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Isaac stood, instantly alert, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Stay here," he told Cassidy, but she was already rising to stand beside him. 3 men rode into the yard, their horses kicking up dust in the evening light. Isaac recognized the leader immediately, Victor Caldwell, the largest rancher in the territory and a man known for his ruthless business practices. "Ingram," Caldwell called, not bothering to dismount. "Been meaning to pay you a visit." "What can I do for you, Caldwell?" Isaac's tone was neutral, but Cassidy could feel the tension in him. Caldwell's eyes shifted to Cassidy, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Miss Greene, isn't it? Heard about your misfortune." His gaze returned to Isaac. "Also heard you've been providing shelter." "Mr. Ingram saved my life," Cassidy said, stepping forward, "and has been a perfect gentleman." Caldwell chuckled. "I'm sure he has, but that's not why I'm here." He leaned forward in his saddle. "I'm interested in buying your father's land, Miss Greene, willing to pay a fair price." Isaac felt Cassidy stiffen beside him. "The land is not for sale," she said firmly. "Everything's for sale at the right price," Caldwell countered. "And let's be practical. What are you going to do with it?" "You can't work it alone, and rebuilding would cost more than you've got." "That's her decision to make," Isaac interjected. "And this isn't the time or place to discuss business." Caldwell's smile vanished. "Just trying to be helpful, Ingram. After all, Miss Greene's situation is precarious. No home, no family, staying with a man who's not her husband. People talk. People who have nothing better to do," Cassidy retorted. "Perhaps, but reputation matters out here, especially for a woman alone." Caldwell tipped his hat. "Think about my offer, Miss Greene." "I'll be in town for the next week." After the men had ridden away, Cassidy let out a shaky breath. "I despise that man." "Most people do," Isaac agreed. "He's been trying to buy up every small ranch in the territory, wants to control all the good grazing land." "Is that why he wants Pa's property?" "For grazing," Isaac hesitated. "Partly, but there's been talk of the railroad coming through. If it does, land values will soar. Your father's property is situated perfectly for a potential station stop." Cassidy's eyes widened. "So it could be worth a lot more than Caldwell is offering." "Potentially, but that's still years away if it happens at all." She nodded, thinking. "I need to be smart about this. Pa worked too hard for that land to let someone like Caldwell take advantage." Isaac looked at her with newfound respect. "You sound like a rancher's daughter." "I am a rancher's daughter," she reminded him with a smile, "even if the ranch is gone." That night, Cassidy couldn't sleep. The encounter with Caldwell had stirred up questions she'd been avoiding. What would she do? She couldn't stay with Isaac indefinitely, regardless of how comfortable it had become. Selling her land would give her options, but the thought of Caldwell owning her father's property made her stomach turn. There was another option, one she'd been considering more and more lately. She could rebuild. It would be difficult, expensive, and many would say impossible for a woman alone. But it was her land, her heritage, and she was stronger than most gave her credit for. The next morning, she approached Isaac as he saddled his horse. "I want to rebuild," she announced without preamble. Isaac paused, looking at her over his horse's back. "Are you sure? It's a massive undertaking." "I'm sure it won't be the same house, something smaller, more manageable, but I need to try." She met his gaze steadily. "Will you help me?" Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, disappointment, relief. She couldn't tell. "Of course I'll help," he said finally. "Whatever you need." Over the following weeks, a plan took shape. Isaac helped Cassidy draft a simple design for a cabin that could be expanded later if needed. They calculated costs for lumber and supplies, and when the strongbox funds proved insufficient, Isaac surprised her by offering a loan. "I can't accept that," Cassidy protested. "Consider it an investment," Isaac countered. "In a neighboring ranch, good neighbors are valuable out here." Word spread about Cassidy's plans, and to her surprise, offers of help came from unexpected quarters. The blacksmith promised hinges and nails at cost. The Wilsons donated windows from their old store. Even Sheriff Williams volunteered his time for the raising. "People respect what you're doing," Isaac told her. taking back what's yours instead of giving up. Construction began in late summer. The first day, Cassidy stood on her land, surrounded by neighbors and friends, watching as the foundation was marked out where her childhood home had once stood. Isaac worked alongside the other men, his shirt soon soaked with sweat as they cleared debris and prepared the site. At midday, Cassidy brought water to the workers. When she handed a dipper to Isaac, their fingers brushed, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing I could do this." Isaac took a long drink before answering. "I've never doubted you for a second, Cassidy Greene." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sounded right in his mouth as if he'd been saying it for years. The work proceeded quickly with so many hands helping. By the first frost, the cabin was enclosed with a solid roof, windows, and a stone fireplace that would keep the interior warm through the winter. It was simple, just 2 rooms with space for essential furniture, but it was hers. The day the last shingle went on, the community gathered for a small celebration. Tables were set up outside, laden with food contributed by nearly every household. There was music and dancing, and for a few hours, the hardships of frontier life were forgotten in the joy of shared accomplishment. As the evening wore on, Isaac found Cassidy standing at the edge of the gathering, looking at her new home. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. She shook her head. "Just thinking about Pa." He would have loved to see this, the community coming together, the old place rising again. "He would have been proud of you," Isaac said. "I know I am." Cassidy turned to face him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Isaac. You would have found a way." His voice was soft in the gathering darkness. "You're the strongest person I know, Cassidy Greene." Perhaps it was the emotion of the day, or the weeks of working side by side, or simply the way he looked at her in that moment, but Cassidy found herself stepping closer to him. "I'll be moving in tomorrow," she said. "Starting my new life here." "I know," was there sadness in his tone. "I'll miss our evenings on the porch," she admitted. "The talks we had." Isaac's eyes searched her face. "It's not that far between our ranches. I could still ride over if you wanted." "I'd like that." Around them, the celebration continued, but they stood in their own quiet moment, something unspoken passing between them. The first night in her new home, Cassidy found it difficult to sleep. The cabin was sturdy and warm, but after months at Isaac's ranch, the silence felt oppressive. She missed the sounds of Frank snoring from the small room off the kitchen, the creak of Isaac turning on his pallet in the main room, the distant lowing of cattle in the night. Morning brought work and purpose. There was a chicken coop to build, furniture to arrange, supplies to organize. Sheriff Williams had found her 2 milk cows being sold by a widow moving east, and Isaac had contributed a horse of her own, a gentle mare named Daisy with a white star on her forehead. 3 days after she moved in, Isaac rode over as promised. He brought with him a small box. "Housewarming gift," he explained, almost shyly. Inside was a set of hand-carved wooden spoons, the handles smooth from hours of careful work. "Isaac, they're beautiful," Cassidy breathed, running her fingers over the polished wood. "Made them myself. Been working on them evenings." He looked around the cabin, noting the feminine touches she'd already added: a colorful quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Place looks nice." "It's starting to feel like home," she agreed. "Still quiet, though." Isaac nodded in understanding. "That's the hardest part of living alone, the quiet." They fell into a routine. Isaac would ride over several times a week, helping with heavier tasks or simply sharing a meal and conversation. Sometimes they would sit outside as they had on his porch, watching the stars emerge and talking about everything and nothing. As winter set in, the visits became more precious. The harsh Montana weather could make travel between ranches impossible for days at a time, and Cassidy found herself watching the horizon anxiously when too many days passed without seeing him. During one particularly brutal blizzard, Cassidy feared for Isaac's safety when he hadn't appeared for nearly a week. When he finally made it through, his face reddened by cold and his horse exhausted from plowing through deep drifts, she threw her arms around him without thinking. "I was worried," she admitted, pulling back in embarrassment when she realized what she'd done. Isaac's cold, numbed face broke into a smile. "Takes more than a little snow to keep me away." They spent the afternoon by her fire, thawing out and talking, and for the first time, Isaac stayed until after dark. As he prepared to leave, Cassidy frowned. "You can't ride back in this. The temperature's dropping, and it's a moonless night." "I've made the ride in worse," he assured her. "And risked frostbite doing it," she countered. "Stay, please, you can take the bed and I'll use my blankets by the fire." Isaac hesitated, clearly torn between concern for propriety and practical safety. "What would people say?" Cassidy smiled wryly. "People have been talking since the day you carried me from that fire. One more night won't make much difference." In the end, practical considerations won out. Isaac took the floor despite Cassidy's protests, using his saddle as a pillow and wrapped in blankets she insisted he take. Lying in her bed, aware of his presence just feet away, Cassidy found sleep elusive. She listened to his breathing, steady and deep, and thought about how natural it felt to have him there. "Isaac," she whispered into the darkness. "Are you awake?" Came the drowsy response. "Thank you." "For everything?" There was a pause then. "You don't need to thank me, Cassidy. I know, but I want to," she hesitated. "When you found me that night crawling away from the fire, I thought I was going to die. Then suddenly you were there, carrying me away, promising not to let go." "I remember," Isaac said softly. "No one had made me feel that safe since my father died." The darkness made it easier to admit. "Sometimes I think maybe the fire was a blessing in disguise. If it hadn't happened, we might never have." "Never have what?" His voice was fully awake now, intent. Cassidy swallowed. "Known each other, not like this." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Isaac spoke. "Get some sleep, Cassidy. Morning will be here soon enough." In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow. Isaac helped Cassidy with her chores, working together in companionable silence until it was time for him to leave. At the door, he paused. "About what you said last night." Cassidy felt her cheeks warm. "It was foolish. Please forget it." "No," Isaac said firmly, "it wasn't foolish. And I can't forget it because I feel the same way." His eyes held hers. "The fire was terrible, but finding you, that changed everything for me." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'll be back in a few days," he promised. And then he was gone, riding through the pristine snow toward his ranch. Cassidy stood in the doorway long after he'd disappeared from sight, her fingers touching the place where his lips had been. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new life and possibilities. Cassidy's garden flourished, and her small flock of chickens grew as chicks hatched. The cow gave birth to a healthy calf, and even Daisy seemed to prance with renewed energy as the snow melted and green grass appeared. Isaac's visits continued, sometimes bringing small gift seeds for her garden, a book he thought she'd enjoy, a piece of colorful fabric from the general store. Their relationship deepened, moving slowly from friendship to something more, marked by longer glances and lingering touches. One sunny afternoon in late April, they rode together to check the boundaries of Cassidy's property. Near the stream that marked the eastern edge, they stopped to rest the horses and enjoy the warmth of the day. "This was Pa's favorite spot," Cassidy said, spreading a blanket on the grass. "He used to bring me here for picnics when I was small." Isaac sat beside her, looking out over the land. "He chose well when he settled here. Good water, protected from the worst winds, soil that grows just about anything. He always said he was the luckiest man in the territory." Cassidy smiled at the memory. "Ma used to tell him luck had nothing to do with it, that he had an eye for good land and the backbone to work it properly." Sounds like she knew him well. "They loved each other deeply," Cassidy said softly. "Even when times were hard, and they faced it together." She plucked a wildflower from the grass. "I always hope to find that kind of love someday." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "And have you?" he asked finally, his voice low. Cassidy looked at him then, really looked at him, the man who had carried her from the flames, who had held her steady when everything was falling apart, who had believed in her ability to rebuild when others doubted. "I think perhaps I have," she whispered. Isaac's hand found hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. "Cassidy Greene," he began, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "I've been trying to find the right words for months now." "You don't need fancy words with me, Isaac," he smiled. "No, I suppose I don't." "Truth is, I've been in love with you since that first night when you looked up at me with those fierce eyes, still fighting even when everything was burning around you." Cassidy's heart pounded in her chest. "Isaac, I'm not asking for an answer right now," he continued. "Just wanted you to know how I feel. That night when I promised not to let go, I meant it in more ways than I realized at the time." Cassidy reached up, touching his face gently. "I don't need time to think about it," she said. "I love you too, Isaac Ingram." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as months of unspoken feelings found expression. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Marry me," Isaac said, the words more command than question. "Build a life with me, Cassidy, combine our ranches, our dreams. Let me keep my promise to never let go." Tears filled Cassidy's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said simply. Yes, they were married in late June, with the entire community gathered to witness the union. The ceremony took place on Cassidy's property, near the stream where Isaac had proposed. Mrs. Wilson had helped Cassidy make a simple but elegant wedding dress, and Isaac wore a new suit ordered specially from St. Louis. Sheriff Williams, who had been dubious about their relationship at first, stood as Isaac's best man. "Never seen two people better suited," he admitted grudgingly during his toast, "or more stubborn." The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under the stars. As the party continued around them, Isaac led Cassidy away for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, his arms around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into him, "even with everything that's happened, all the loss. I wouldn't change it if it meant not finding you." Isaac kissed her, a promise of the life they would build together. "I told you that night that you had more than you thought," he reminded her, "and now we both do." They decided to make their home at Cassidy's rebuilt cabin, with plans to expand it as their family grew. Isaac's ranch would continue operating with Frank overseeing the day-to-day work, while Isaac split his time between the two properties. Eventually, they planned to join the lands into one larger ranch, the Ingram Green Ranch. They decided to honor both their heritages. Life on the frontier remained challenging. There were difficult winters, dry summers that threatened the cattle, and the constant work that came with maintaining two ranches. But there were joys too: the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Emma after Cassidy's mother, the prosperity that came as the territory grew and the price of beef rose, the deepening of their love through shared struggles and triumphs. 5 years after the fire that had brought them together, Cassidy stood on the porch of their home, now expanded to a comfortable 4-room house with a proper kitchen and nursery, watching as Isaac played with their daughter and infant son, James, named for her father. "Mama, look," Emma called, her dark hair so like her father's flying behind her as she ran. "Papa's teaching me to rope," Cassidy smiled, remembering her own father teaching her the same skill at about the same age. The circle of life continuing, patterns repeating but always with new variations. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Isaac joined her on the porch, James asleep in his arms. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked, noting her contemplative expression. "Just grateful," she replied, "for this life we've built for you." She took the sleeping baby from him, cradling him against her shoulder. "Sometimes I still can't believe how it all began, with fire and loss and you carrying me away from the ruins." Isaac slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Best thing I ever did was ride by your place that night. Even with all the gossip it caused, the scandal of me staying at your ranch unchaperoned," she teased. "Especially because of that," he grinned. "Gave me a reason to make an honest woman of you." Cassidy laughed softly, mindful of the sleeping child. "As if you needed a reason beyond my charm and beauty. And your humility, clearly." Isaac kissed her temple. "I love you, Cassidy Ingram, more today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." Inside, Emma called for them, ready for her bedtime story. As they turned to go in, Cassidy looked once more at the land that had been her family's for generations and was now the foundation for a new legacy. "I love you too," she said, leaning into her husband's strength. "Thank you for keeping your promise and never letting go." Together, they walked into the warm light of the home they had built. their children secure in their love, their future stretching out before them like the vast Montana sky full of possibility, challenge, and hope.